Mayerbi. C'est pour nous sengo rotebeka. Manche ya fok. Ya kwa no e on kari no. Momo wese. E on manyu.
Oh no! Petit. Nchemchi Vomanyu.
Vomanyu Manchoko Yoromos. Special dedication to Manyu sons and daughters all around the world. Seseko champion Arab money. Jonaya Provinces. Executive Director at Global Think and Tank Africa, Joachim Marie, Morsing London. Tata Asaf Akebe Mbiebi Eyanga Dr. Henshaw Ebai Vomanyu, the future. President Desmond Ashu, Mecca, UAE, Dubai. Rambo Mix de Dubai, Montagbari. Everybody on the dance floor. President Daflo, Mr. Ebot, oh no, Eno Rouse, Waters, Zidane, Houston, Texas, USA, Eno Soro, Mamawa, Gore Seseku, Gore Daji, Atagas Pariawa. Gina Bison, Business Gurus, Houston, Texas. Eriti Neva, Mama Ese Bebe Manga, Neashu Jim, Varovese, 5e Tivative Kive Tegemanya Dorambe, Peseva Kwai. Oh no! the man behind the machine. Mano. Dax Petroleum, Montagbar, Commandant Bisson, Customs, Takungasa, Maxime Manor, Bangakangari, the Golden Voice, Mamanyu.
Just like Africa,
Welcome to Chat Night. Chat Night Africa. Welcome to Chat Night. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. Welcome to Chat Night. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. We all over the world. Chat Night Africa. We all over the world. Chat Night Africa. Welcome to Chat Night. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. Welcome to Chat Night. We bring you good vibe. We shine on the light. We all over the world. Chat Night Africa. We all over the world. Chat Night Africa. Welcome to Chat Night, the only place that we give you good vibes. Chat Night Africa.
Chat Night Africa. Let's gang up, change mindset, and empower Africans. Are you ready? Africa to the world.
And now, live from the headquarters of Chat Night Africa, Divine Chamical.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Voices of Africa on the platform Chat Night Africa. My name is Divine Chamakong, and I am anchoring this broadcast from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Regardless of who or what triggers a war, its consequences are devastating. Since 2016/17, the reality in Anglophone Cameroon has been grim. Women are raped, people kidnapped, extrajudicial killings, whole villages razed to the ground, etc., etc. Now, no one knows for certain when the war ends. It could take another 5 years or, God forbid, 50. So what would it take to resolve the conflict? The international community, international legal instruments, a political settlement, or the battlefield? Ladies and gentlemen, to shine light on each of these components, I invited people who can engage in a robust conversation while staying respectful of each other. Our only lady on the panel this week on Voices of Africa is Dr. Emma Osung. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Osung. Live from South Africa is Dr. Gabila Fortung, a political economist and an expert in international relations. Dr. Gabila Fortung is a senior lecturer at Northwest University in South Africa. We also will be having on the platform Mr. Ato Mutia. He is the moderator of Southern Cameroon's International Town Hall. Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching Voices of Africa on the platform Chat Night Africa. We are live on 3 platforms: our YouTube channel, Chat Night Africa, our website, our broadcast website, www.chatnightafrica.net, and we're also streaming this broadcast on our Facebook broadcast page. Now, this disclaimer: we invited Mr. Bo Herbert, and he agreed to be on the platform on the program today. And that's when we proceeded with publishing his name online. For unexplained reasons, I could not get in touch with him either by text or phone calls. I hope he joins us later. We also invited Dr. Simon Munzo. Hopefully he joins us. I am not able to reach him by phone. Well, we always say ladies before gentlemen. So the first person to take my question is, once again, Dr. Emma Osung. Dr. Osung, thank you for making this debut on Voices of Africa at Chat Night.
Thank you very much, Mr. Damukong, for allowing me to share on this platform with some very interesting guests that I'm also having the honor of listening and hopefully learning from them. Before I start, perhaps I should introduce myself, since you only called my name, since I am now meeting your audience for the first time. Again, my name is Emma Osung. By all means, call me Emma. I am the founder of a platform called Women for Permanent Peace. We work to advocate for women and children and to keep the victim front and center in this 5-year war. I am also, by profession, an aerospace engineer, and I say I am once a couch warrior awoken to social justice advocacy. So thank you for allowing me to introduce myself, and I'll turn it back to you to go on with the interview and discussion.
Thank you, Emma. So we simply call you Emma. We appreciate that. You follow very, very keenly the conflict in Anglophone Cameroon. Some people prefer to call it Southern Cameroons, others call it Ambazonia. Why take an interest in that? I mean, you're making good money in the United States. Why are you concerned about what's going on out there in Anglophone Cameroon?
First of all, good money is only good if put to good use. So I'm not sure how much good money I make. My interest in the war in Southern Cameroons is because I am a stakeholder as well as victim. My interest is because my homeland is impacted by what has been described as a genocidal war. Our collective interest ought to be in the war to end it, because wars are not good. And we have seen what is done for our families, the destruction that you highlighted in your introduction, the killing, the use of rape as tools of humiliation and extermination, the use of political policies and proxies to annihilate and subjugate a people who today we see millions and millions of them fleeing their homeland. We see the human suffering that has been described, not only by external actors, but those on the ground. Particularly here, I think of the Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Assistance, OCHA, whose own report, and I say this not to say there aren't other entities that have been identifying the atrocities. These bodies are calling for a humanitarian catastrophe. So my interest, divine, is existential. It is my family's homes that are being burned down. They are my children who are today languishing in La République du Cameroon, some now, the young girls, subjected to the street lives that we can only imagine they are being taken advantage of. It is the hundreds and hundreds of people who today find themselves indentured servants in foreign distant places as refugees. So I am interested. We ought to be interested. We need to stay front and center, interested in putting an end to this war.
You had an organization, you are the founder of an organization in kind of interested in or fostering peace. How is your organization helping towards resolving? Is there something that you as a woman, an educated woman, can do for the conflict to be resolved?
There's a lot that all of us can do and ought to be doing. When war is declared on a people, it is not left only for those who carry arms, to work night and day, ceaselessly to bring that war to an end. Because, as I said earlier, a threat to a young man who today is described as Amber is a threat to everybody else. War does not know boundaries, as we have seen, where the tools of collective punishment is being used on us. So as a woman, as someone, whether you're an individual or you head an organization, we ought to take an interest in this crisis for the simple reason that we need to bring every and all things available to us, whether it's in international advocacy, whether it's in speaking to hearts and minds about our own brothers who today are being used by a regime to execute their policies, to appeal to their hearts and minds as to what is going on. And by this, I don't believe that they are not aware. So I think the question is rather, why are there any persons of Southern Cameroonian extraction, and for that matter, those across the Mongo who say they are our brothers, why are they silent? Or why are they on the fence? Or why do they even think this is somebody else's thing? War is a dirty business that all and any effort must not be spared to stop it, and stop it immediately and as soon as possible. So I think whether I head an organization, whether anybody is in a position of influence, from everybody we can think of, war needs a collective attention, a collective time, talents, and treasures to end human suffering and do everything we see possible to do so.
Thank you, Dr. Emma Osung, for those preliminary remarks, and very thoughtful, insightful. I am having signals that Dr. Munzo is trying to connect. As soon as I can find him in the virtual studio, I will bring him into stream. Time for us now to go across to Dr. Gabila Fortung. He is connecting now live from South Africa. Dr. Gabila, once again, thank you for coming on Voices of Africa at Chat Night Africa. There has been so much talk that the international community ought to get involved. We're not so much going to get into why the war, although at some point we might find it necessary to look back a little bit, but more we are looking, the war is already there. More we are looking at how can we get out of this devastating conflict. It's, as mentioned, my friend Dr. Emma Osung also said, confirmed, it's wreaking havoc on the population, especially women who are bearing the brunt the most. You teach international relations in South Africa. I would say that compared to what is going on in Ukraine and the international community getting involved, there's some kind of lukewarm attitude towards what's going on in Southern Cameroon. How do you explain that? I know I was listening to Mr. Chris Anu. I invited him here at some point. He backpedaled, but he said it's not a war in Cameroon because Southern Cameroonian fighters are not causing enough devastation, enough havoc. Do you agree with Chris Anu?
There's a war in the Southern Cameroons. There's a war in Cameroon. There's a war in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. I will not go into the semantics of intensity, how much, how intense should a conflict be to qualify as war. It's not within my expertise, so I'm not even going to go into that space. Like Dr. Emma has said, and as we are all very concerned about the situation of unrest, conflict, war, arms circulating, people losing their lives, growing insecurity, our land, our people, as we have never known and have never experienced. So we've come from a place where we're an extremely peaceful, calm people. I mean, we were used to armed robberies being conducted with den guns, and we have graduated to a space where we have automatic rifles and improvised explosive devices and advanced tools that are being used that are costing a loss of life. So the semantics of whether it's war or it's not war, or intensity has not yet attracted international attention. I will not go into that debate. I wish Chris Ano was here to defend that position. But I would indulge your question by saying that I feel that we sit in a very complex space as a people. That sort of explains why our own crisis has not gained prominence of the like of what is happening in Ukraine for a variety of reasons. Primarily, I would want to start off with the complexity of our historical evolution as a people that saw us to arrive at where we are at the moment. But specifically, I would say that there are 2 or 3 reasons which our people should be made aware. That probably explains why we have not attained the kind of renown in terms of awareness of what is going on. I personally feel a part of it is partly because of our inefficiency in mobilizing to get sufficient attention to be directed towards our efforts. In the early 2016, 2017, there was much more consciousness raised around what was going on and much more advocacy. But in more recent times, it has sort of disappeared from the radar for 2 reasons. The politics of the Gulf of Guinea is extremely complex. The African Union has an approach to conflict resolution that places a high emphasis, on the one hand, on the responsibilities of regional economic communities. So within the African continent, the African Union's approach to the resolution of conflict is to first of all default to the regional economic community. In our own context, that would be CEMAC. Within that practice of defaulting to regional economic communities, they also have a practice of defaulting to regional hegemons to take the lead. So in the case of conflict in Mozambique, in the Cabo Delgado region, for example, we saw that SADC was the one that took the first lead in convening a conference to resolve that, put together troops, put together a defense response. So that is the African Union's own way of enhancing the role of its regional economic communities. We would fall under the context of CEMAC, bordered by Nigeria, that falls under ECOWAS. So before our item gets onto the agenda of the African Union, to be discussed as a security concern, it would have to probably first be discussed at the level of CEMAC, and it would have to be discussed at the level of ECOWAS, principally at the level of CEMAC. And we know that the practice within these regional economic communities is for the regional hegemon to sort of dictate the tone of how things are going to be conducted. Unfortunately for us as a people, the regional hegemon in CEMAC is La République du Cameroun, is the government of Cameroon. So it therefore then means that our issue is going to follow the tone that is going to be dictated by the government of Cameroon. It's not going to rise up to the agenda of the CEMAC region as from a security perspective. CEMAC is not going to present it to the African Union as a security perspective, a security issue or as a conflict issue. Now, that is the principal challenge we are facing at the moment. If CEMAC doesn't present it, no other regional economic community is going to present it. Now, if you want to appeal to the role or to specific countries in the African Union fraternity like South Africa or Nigeria, you then face a second precedence or practice in African diplomacy that says that regional hegemons tend to take the lead in issues that directly concern them. So South Africa is going to tell you they would not take the lead on an issue for which Nigeria as a regional hegemon is directly connected. We do know the complexity of our history with Nigeria. We do know the complexity of the relationship between Cameroon and Nigeria, the management of the Nigerian civil war, and the long-established fraternity that's been established between the 2 regions. So Nigeria looks at the conflict of the Southern Cameroon through the lens of its own internal incoherencies and challenges. And it is not prepared, notwithstanding the enormity of the suffering that the people of the Southern Cameroon may be experiencing. They are not prepared, on the one hand, to challenge the government of Cameroon to its human rights court or its approach to resolving the conflict. They are not prepared to be the one to take the lead to bring this thing to the attention of the African Union or the African fraternity in resolving the issue. So we have all these layers of blankets that are predisposed within the existing mechanisms to sort of shut the thing down and let it not prosper, not gain attention, the kind of popularity of what is happening in Ukraine. And then obviously, unfortunately, we are then faced with an African or United Nations president's practice of the resolution of conflict that, on the one hand, defaults to the politics of the Security Council and the interests of Security Council members that tend to determine how importance is ascribed to specific conflict. In the case of Ukraine, European Union members that, like France and UK, are permanent members of the Security Council, have taken a position. It's against Russia. The US has taken a position. So the big boys, you know, the big boys are playing on the big scale, and all of a sudden, that unfortunately then gets to determine what becomes priority on the international scale. How are we supposed to get around that? I think it takes a lot much more of advocacy on our parts in order to get the issue to the agenda.
Welcome to that, and to ask a lot of questions, how far or in what form advocacy can be done. I'm sure that our sister on the broadcast today, Dr. Emma Osung, will throw light on that. But for now, let's meet Mr. Arthur Mochia, who is the moderator of, Mr. Arthur Mochia is the moderator of Southern Cameroon's International Forum. Mr. Mochia, thank you for accepting to come on Voices of Africa.
And thank you for having me again on this platform, Mr. Divine Chamukong. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
You are unapologetically Ambazonia. You never have at any point regretted being that or taking the positions that you take, by the way, publicly. That's why you moderate the Southern Cameroon's International Town Hall. Now, what are you hearing from those you speak to during the town hall as a path forward? The battlefield?
Well, the town hall is not a political organization. It's a platform with a mission to create a respectful civil environment where Southern Cameroonians can gather and speak about the issues that concern us. It's like a market square, and we thought that there was nothing out there where we could assemble regularly within short intervals every 2 weeks to look at the immediate issues that concern us as Southern Cameroonians. It just happens by default that a majority of Southern Cameroonians support outright independence. Cardinal Toumi did the survey, the CDN did a survey. Even late Senator Henry Kemende said it on one of the TV shows he appeared on, that he, as a representative of the people, if he were to be honest, 99.9% of his people, he is from Gorky-Tunja in the northern zone, would be for independence. So that seems to carry the tone when we gather at the platform to answer your question. Yes.
We'll get to that, but let me cut in here to ask you this. We hear all these percentages thrown around, 97%, 99%, 0.99, all that. One could question the strength of the survey. Remember, we would have thought that Hillary Clinton would be president of the United States if we went by the survey, the opinion poll that was done. Because opinion poll cannot explain a people's position on an issue over time. It's a snapshot of the moment. So how can you talk about 99%? I mean, I just wanted you to explain how you arrive at that and why you think that those studies done are something we should keep referencing on the show.
Well, we have statisticians, not only Southern Cameroonians. Dieudonné Somba, for example, said it on one of his TV shows in La République du Cameroun, that he dared Cameroon not to risk a referendum because they would lose, even if they had set the bar at 90%. These are people on the ground. But sample opinions, right? Random sample is something that is done by social scientists, is something that is done by scientists, is something that is done by statisticians, is something that is done by mathematicians. It's a global accepted way of getting an opinion of what people think. You don't have to go out and count, right? Unless we want to say that that methodology works only in everything other than the opinion of Southern Cameroonians. Yes, sometimes it does not meet the margin, but when you look, for example, the example you quoted about Hillary Clinton, you don't look at the behind the scenes currents that acted against her, the emotional sentiment of the FBI report, the involvement of the Russians, which the American intelligence community has ascertained that they influenced the elections. So if you put it on a level playing field, those random samples used, as I said, by all sorts of researchers and methodologists in different disciplines would have held had it been free and fair of any external influence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muchia. At this point, I'm going to bring on Dr. Simon Munzo. I see him available. He's ready for participation. Dr. Munzo, thank you for accepting to come on once more on Voices of Africa.
Thank you very much, Divine. Thanks for having me again on your platform. And a pleasure to meet my co-discussants or panelists of, I don't know where to say, this morning, this afternoon, or tonight, wherever we are. Thank you.
Dr. Munzo, you were among those who riled up Southern Cameroonians to be so resentful of the Yaoundé administration. You were first in the CPDM. What changed?
I don't know what you mean by what changed.
You were first in the CPDM, at least we agree on that.
Yes.
Yes, sir. CPDM doesn't now take the position that you take publicly. You are taking positions that go contrary to what the CPDM wants.
Yes, I did that from the beginning, and I did that while I was within the CPDM. Interestingly enough, I see here amongst the very first comments in the very first 5 minutes or so of the program, but before I came in, on the chat, there is a comment, someone who says, is it double standard Munzo should tell Biya the truth. Double Munzo should tell Biya the truth.
Yes, we see all those comments. We'll come to comments and we'll open the phone line at some point.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, I'm trying to set the scene, Divine, for your question. Because in this whole thing, we seem to think that it is what we want that represents the truth, and anything that anybody else thinks is only a lie, cannot be the truth. Now, coming to your specific question, do you know that when I attended the tripartite conference in, I think it was 1993, now I attended it, as you rightly observed, as a member of the delegation of the CPDM, because I was indeed National Secretary for Economic and Social Affairs of the Central Committee of the CPDM. But that did not stop me once the Anglophone problem came on the table at that tripartite conference to say to my party that there is a problem, there is an Anglophone problem. And we as a ruling party have an obligation to address problems, including the Anglophone problem. Do you understand? And I said, it is not incompatible. Belonging, in my own book, belonging to the ruling party, belonging to the government, the regime in power, is not incompatible with highlighting the Anglophone problem in our nation and addressing it. I did, from the ranks of the CPDM. And it is when the CPDM refused to pay heed then in 1993, as it is doing now in 2022, that I left the party and I resigned from my teaching position at the university because I realized that continuing to work as a civil servant under the authority of my bosses was incompatible in their mind would continue to speak out on the Anglophone problem. So in other words, there's been no change in my position because the problem has remained the same. Over 30 years, my position has remained the same. And I will tell the members of the CPDM today, the ruling party, and I will tell the government of today, as I did tell them 30 odd years ago, that you can be in the ruling party, you can be in the government and still acknowledge that there is an Anglophone problem.
Point taken, sir. Your position clearly is at odds with those of, clearly, I think, Dr. Emma Osong. I'll be asking her where she disagrees with you. And obviously, Mr. Atok Muchia, not so sure about Dr. Gabila Fortum, but time for us to bring on to stream Dr. Emma Osong so we can have a conversation. Dr. Emma Osong, you have listened to your friend there, Dr. Munzo. Where do you disagree with him? You know his trend of thought all along since the war broke out. Are there areas where you disagree with him?
First of all, welcome, Dr. Munzo. I'm sitting here and smiling around very serious conversation, not because I want to make light of it, but I wanted to hold you up to something, Mr. Chamuko, is that I'd like to talk about the reasons why the international community is not engaging in finding solutions. But let's come to that. I've just listened to someone that I hold in very high esteem, Dr. Munzo here, as well as my co-panelist. And I want to raise a few issues that I think I disagree with him on, or I'm at variance. First of all, I think he can school us on the issue of fair labeling, which is, I think, a concept he's very familiar with in his legal profession. And I'm not of that profession. I'm an aerospace engineer. But what I've been told and understand as I look at this issue, if we are not able to name, label, and call something by its true labeling, we are unable to find the right solution. And that's just a fact. Now, let's look at what the 5-year war is not. It is not about political identity, hence the mislabeling as the Anglophone crisis. It is not about political power. Let's leave those issues to the Frundis, the Kawalas, the Maurice Kamtos of the world to deal with it. It is not about cultural anxieties or minority grievances, because we all can accept on this call that every country has its minority issues that it deals with. Now, to the Federalists who are looking at this through the lens of an Anglophone crisis, let's be clear. They have had 60 years to make their case to the Biya's government, and so far, things have gotten worse. The Federalists, in my view, have become the kinglets, the bourgeoisie class, what Albert Camus says in the Wretched of the Earth, the go-between that have been used as instruments to parrot and to put in place Biya's policies. So a new generation of our children, mind you, have risen up spontaneously, as was demonstrated September 22nd and October 1st, and continue to be demonstrated, as Dr. Gabila has just expressed, to say, not again. The people who are now interlocutors, co-opters, and who have allowed themselves to take on the Biya's mantra, even though grudgingly, cannot now be seen to proffer a solution. Now, again, when we go to the substantive issue and we define what the problem is, the bitter pill is the root causes, and the root causes does not take us to 1972. Otherwise, the Federalists should have succeeded. That bitter pill is what Mr. Biya is not able to take, is what France is not able to take, the United States, EU, etc. So we must push the agenda for positive peace and not allow a generation that for 60 years have failed to make the argument. So my question to Dr. Munzo is, what can now happen in this 5 years since and in the immediate future that he couldn't achieve for 60 years? I'm not saying the gentleman is 60 years, but including his forefathers. Instead, as I mentioned, they have allowed the one and indivisible mantra, the indoctrination, assimilation, annexation, that today is full-fledged genocidal war. And I argue with him that the moment the human rights abuses have escalated, war crimes are being committed, all the vexations that we see that now puts Cameroon, La République, as a genocidal regime, what do the federalists now offer to the next generation that have said too many of their parents, their siblings, their cohorts have been slaughtered, and they are no longer willing to carry on in a relationship with a genocidal regime? I think that's where I stand, and the questions that I would ask Dr. Munzo.
Well, Dr. Osong, thank you for what you cast as questions to Dr. Munzo. But, you know, I would rather that we conduct this as a discussion, because the truth of the matter is that since this crisis started, we, whether you call us or we call ourselves Anglophones, Southern Cameroonians, Ambazonians, whatever, the people of whatever territory, but we know who we're talking about. Unfortunately, my dear sister, Doc, we have denied ourselves the chance of conducting a conversation in which we listen to each other. We try to preach to each other, and we do so at cross purposes, because there are many assumptions in what you just said. First of all, you seem in your statement to suppose that federalists are not concerned about what you say, the too many deaths and the suffering and so on. Who tells you that? Of course, federalists are concerned with all of that. Now, you say that it is not, the war is not this, the war is not that. You've given us a catalog of what it is not. What I didn't hear you say is to tell us what it is. Because again, this is one of the problems. Each one of us seems to have their own different perception, their own different view of what the problem really is. And if we cannot meet and talk together, listen to each other, we will never arrive, us as Anglophones, Southern Cameroonians, call you what you will, and what is really the matter, and therefore what are we dealing with. Now, when you say that federalists have not delivered in, you call it 60 years or whatever, I can tell you also that there are conflicts, if you like, self-determination conflicts in the world, which have been, for which arms have been taken up, but which have gone on for more than 60 years. Okay, I'm sure you're aware of Northern Ireland. Do you know for how long the Irish Republican Army in particular, has been fighting for self-determination for Northern Ireland? Have they got it? Do you know for how long for the Sahrawis? Do you know how long they've been fighting for recognition of their integrity with arms against Morocco? Do you know for how long? Do you know for how long? You said you didn't know for how long the Sudanese fought. And only recently got what they want and see where they are with what they got. The point I'm trying to make, Doc, is that let's not be simplistic. It is not the means that is chosen that determines the victory that we're going to get. There are several different factors. So to throw it at several federalists and simply say that you've been at it for 60 years, what have you got to show for it? I can tell you also by way of projection, based on what we see in other countries, we can project that the separatist war could well go on for the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years with no guarantee that they will deliver independence to Southern Cameroon. So that's not the issue.
If I may ask a question to you, Dr. Munzo, what makes you think that federalism is the panacea for this problem?
Well, listen, okay, that takes us, if you like, let's put it this way. Once again, I want to be very clear on this, and that probably leads on to these surveys we are talking about, which my brother, Mr. Mucha, was talking about. Now, I don't think that there's any Southern Cameroonian who, given the true choice today, do you want to remain in union with the former Republic of Cameroon that you joined in 1961, or do you want to separate? I can tell you that on the basis of our experiences that's this past 61 years, which we've been complaining about, any level-headed Anglophone will say we want to leave. And I've said it over and over again for those who want to hear that would include Simon Munzu. Okay? But let's be realistic. That's not where we are today. We cannot deny that there was a referendum where we were given a choice whether to join La République or to join Nigeria. We cannot deny that in that referendum, our people decided overwhelmingly to join Republic of Cameroon. We cannot deny that as a result of that, we joined Republic of Cameroon. The only thing that we can fault Republic of Cameroon on was that Republic of Cameroon reneged on the premise on which we decided to join.
Okay, let's see if
we joined knowing and understanding that we're going to form a federation. And our grievance today is that that premise was disregarded, it was broken, and we are asking that it should be repaired. And for that, we can jolly well call the international community and others to witness, because that corresponds with the facts.
Okay, let's give a chance to Dr. Osung to respond, and I have a question for her also.
So very briefly, again, to my point, this is not a discussion that we need to talk about simplicity or not. People are dying. So my level of understanding can be simplistic, doctor, but the facts remain. This is not a minority grievance. The feds, as we call them here, the Federalists, have made this argument about joining as the reason why we need to go back. However, let me offer you the root causes. The root causes is the annexation of a once autonomous region that had all the apparatus of its government to assume it into another, assimilate, assume, and subjugate, and today, through force, make it compliant. So I don't see how the people who are in part complicit and some who, like you, have slightly different stance can take us back and accept solutions from a party that has been the aggressor, a party that is waging a genocidal war. So I simply offer to you in this discussion, Dr. Munzo, that what we are seeing, that we cannot deny, that is also the truth, that there is a generation that spontaneously stood up and denied and decried and are willing to die to say, even during the Federation, you systematically dismantled and subjected us as a second class. So I offer you today that the solution is a bitter pill for which La République refuses to accept, which is to sit down and look us in the eye and address the root causes. And only then can we Federalists or pro-independentists or unionists get to positive peace. So the historical facts notwithstanding, the strong ideological positions notwithstanding, we need to call it for what it is. It is not an Anglophone problem. It's a problem that goes further to the root causes.
Okay, I have a question. I have a question for you, Dr. Osung, because at some point we'll have to bring up the other panelists. Dr. Osung, you mentioned the generation now. Before the generation now fighting against injustice or fighting for what they call independence, there was the older generation. They were preceded by the Wangupnes, the Goji Dinkas, the Albert Mokongs, and the rest, and so on and so forth. They believed in the force of argument and not the argument of force. The generation you reference now, have they now thought that, well, the argument of force is better than the force of argument? In other words, do they now think that the pen, or the sword rather, is mightier than the pen?
My brother, when you sit in your house in total peace and calm, and someone breaks into it, you have two choices: acquiesce, surrender, or fight back. War was brought to the doorsteps of a generation that had only known war, that a conflict that was not a full-blown war. So this generation, our children, have no choice because they face the barrel of the gun. They can either surrender or be killed. And so far, they're being killed by their numbers. So this generation, while simultaneously defending themselves against an aggressor, I believe they wholeheartedly believe in talking and fighting as talking as been told. But more importantly, let's think about something here and get a little bit philosophical. What do people generally want? Be it in a country or in their society or in their little community. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be welcome, feel valued and included. For 60 years again, not only the Goji Dinkas generation were never seen, they were not heard, they were never valued. As a matter of fact, how many of them languished in jail, to the extent of some leaving the country and exiling? And today we see hundreds of them as refugees. So we are neither valued nor included. And we can go into all the different ways in which the quote Anglophones of the quote NOZO are not literally part of this system. So to answer your question, I say very briefly, you can either fight when you're being attacked, or be killed, or give up. And from all the markers, a generation has risen and they are willing to die because they can no longer accept the status quo.
We are in the United States and we keep hearing successive presidents say, well, we're trying to build a more perfect union. Why wouldn't it be the same thing in Cameroon? Well, it's not perfect, but they try to keep building a more perfect union.
The values of the United States are far from the dictatorial values of the Biya regime. And today, proof of it is in the war. You have a Biya regime that is willing to sell its votes at the United Nations in exchange to say, this is an internal crisis, stay out of it. Meanwhile, human rights abuses abound. We can go into a litany of the crisis for your viewers, but I think they know. The Mami Apis of the world, the Gabus, the baby Caroline, the Chomba massacre, the Kumba, the Bamenda, you go on, and war crimes exist. So there is no perfect union when the dignity of the human being of one segment of a people is trashed.
Do you believe in reports by human rights organizations? As a matter of fact, when I see villages razed down, people summarily killed, it's you wondering whether the government soldiers have commanders at all. Now, do you believe those reports from human rights organizations, man?
If I say I believe them, I have to be in the inner workings of what they do to believe it. But they are reporting and doing the best they can under the circumstances. As Women for Permanent Peace, we have our own sources of information. So there are abuses going on. There is war crimes that are being committed daily. And some have described what is going on in Cameroon as bordering on genocide. So I am happy that the human rights organizations and other local organizations are looking into this. But one thing we need to point out very quickly here is the question of accountability for the atrocities. As long as there isn't an independent international investigations going on, the crimes that have been committed this past 5 years are being whitewashed. We've seen that in the case of Garbo. There have been no direct command, whether it be its civilian command, of the extermination of the Shea and Sika families held to account. So that's another issue on solutions. As long as we talk about solutions, one of it will be accountabilities for crimes committed. So we know that the systematic targeting of people in the so-called NOZO has been going on unabated, but there will be time for accounting, and we need to push that envelope. We need to push that button to get an independent investigation going on.
Dr. Emma Osung. Yeah, Dr. Emma Osung. The same human rights reports, much as they lay the blames on the doorsteps of Paul Biya, also accuse fighters, Ambazonian fighters, of committing some of the most heinous crimes. Do you agree with that? Or do you dispute that?
War is fundamentally a bad thing. That's why we must do everything not to start wars. First and foremost, we must not forget that when the fabric of society breaks down, the underbelly comes out to play. So the young boy, the young child who before was just a truant, today has license to go out and ask for ransom. Now, the young person whose family's farm has been razed down, who's unable to go to school, is now a truant on the street, and the case for recruiting into parallel militia become all too common. So our goal as people who want peace, but peace based on justice, must be to ensure the swiftest cessation of hostilities and ending of this war. So there are and have been atrocities on both sides, but he who wears the crown bears the responsibility, and the crimes of human rights abuses, of war crimes, stops at Biya's doorstep. We cannot forget that. They wage this war, they bear the responsibility, one, to sit down and dialogue and end it, and to stop the impunity crimes.
Thank you.
Any other armed groups that are committing crimes as well.
Thank you, Dr. Emma Osung. Now on the platform, Dr. Gabila, connecting live from South Africa. Dr. Gabila, we have a proliferation of armed groups on the ground, doing all kinds of things, Biya sites doing all kinds of things. People are complaining about both the Ambazonia groups and Biya's soldiers rampaging through the villages. All these Amba groups, when they started, the target was Biya. How do you explain now, Dr. Gabila, that they're fighting each other? I listened to Dr. Emma Osung on one of the platforms. She described it as a civil war. How do you explain that?
That they are fighting each other?
Yes, sir.
The Amba groups or the armed groups, or just a mix of it.
How do you distinguish between the armed groups and the Amba groups?
Okay, so I was trying to make a distinction about whether your question is about the armed groups on the ground fighting each other, or about Amba groups, say the diaspora being on each other's necks, or was it a combination of the two?
A combination of the two.
Okay, so I think that. First of all, I should say that within the context of conflicts of nature, it's not unusual I dig into the example of South Africa as a country to say that even in the fight against apartheid, there were a very diverse combination of actors that were involved in the fight. So you had the Pan-African Congress, you had the African National Congress, you had the Indian Congress, you had a whole range of different actors that that at one point in time in the course of the conflict, even though they were fighting the same cause, the same quote-unquote enemy, had different ideological predispositions, different cultural or leadership preferences, different organizational setups that sort of predispose them to, even though having a common enemy, to be very diverse. The difference which I would put out there between the South African context and what we are witnessing in the Southern Cameroonian case was the ability, one, for there to be the emergence of a well-structured, well-organized, well-trained leadership in the context of South Africa that was guaranteed by the African National Congress. In hindsight, we would come to learn that they benefited from extensive logistical support, even in ideological drilling from Fidel's Cuba, from Russia, and from lots of the satellite states that were pro-communist at the time. So they received training in Tanzania and so on and so forth. So we could say that that ideological push that gave the battle a very clear decolonization, anti-apartheid, anti-imperialist kind of taste, helped the South African context to gain quick coherence, assemble around credible leadership, get resources to be able to take the lead. The Southern Cameroonian context, or in the Amazonian context, we don't have that. So it has been, on the one hand, I think, the absence of the emergence of an outright overriding, clear, coherent leadership structure that sort of sets the tone for everybody else to follow. So within that context, in the passion and I guess the legitimacy of each person's aspiration to lead, every person can put up their hand and say that they are a leader, as long as they can gather a few people around themselves to buy their point of view, and they would go off. So to answer your question, long and short, I want to focus on the groups, especially the diaspora groups. It will be a question of nobody wants to listen to anybody, nobody wants to follow anybody. Everybody feels that they are a leader of some sort, and so they deserve to be listened to and to be followed. There are people who have demonstrated real leadership. I must commend Ato Mochia, who is on the panel, because he speaks the course of action. He's demonstrated leadership in that. He's leading an initiative. He's stuck on the course. He selects issues in which he wants to get involved. He's providing direct leadership. There are a whole lot of people who have taken up responsibilities that they are not able to. They're not capable and are not well-resourced, well-trained, well-informed, unable to deliver on the responsibilities that they have taken. There are people who have, for example, very practically, taken on the responsibility of championing the armed conflict when they have zero experience in military strategy or defense strategy. They don't have the faintest clue what it means to wage a war, talk less of winning it. And they have not as much have wanted to surround themselves with people that have skills or training or experience in that area. There are people who have taken on responsibility to lead diplomatic offensives, and they have been blatant embarrassments to the people of Southern Cameroon, because they sit across the table from diplomats and they ask embarrassing questions, frank, outright embarrassing questions that says that they do not have what it takes to be able to operate in those spaces, and they don't have the humility to surround themselves with people who operate and understand in those spaces. So I think it's a case of everybody thinks that they can be a leader. So,
Dr. Gabila, are the dissensions driven by money, ego, or ideology? Because when I watch all these people you are citing on YouTube, excuse me, sir, when I watch all these people you cite on YouTube, what comes across to me isn't ideological fight or differences, it's about money. So how do you therefore draw comparisons between the struggle in Cameroon and what obtained in South Africa pre-apartheid or during the apartheid, what was going on there?
I wish people with the brilliance of Dr. Emma were at the helm of some of these movements. Maybe would have been able to talk of an ideological divide. Comrade Butcher is going to bear me witness. I dare not say that we are dealing with issues of ideological differences. I unfortunately called it stupidity because the inability, in this case, stupidity is not lack of intelligence, but the inability to be able to articulate the common good and mobilize towards pursuit of the common good. Is there interest? Is it selfishness? Is it money? Not for all the people, not for all of the leaders, not for all of the leaders. There are people whom personally I believe rose up to positions where they were having access and control to resources that they had never dreamt of in their lives, that sort of shaped their perception and their predisposition to take certain decisions. Not to bear any aspersion on anybody's character. Personally, anybody who is not actively involved in a profession of their own and using their extra efforts and extra resources to pour into the struggle to advance it, I don't take serious. You know, anybody who abandons their daytime job to say that they're working for the struggle is just damn outright ridiculous.
Well, I'm going to go over to thank you, sir.
In a country like the US.
All right, let me ask Mr. Muchia a question. Mr. Muchia, had Biya in 2016 said, okay, guys, you don't want to be part of the rest of the country, no problem, goodbye. What do you think we would be having today in Southern Cameroons, given what we see now?
Oh, I think we'll be one of the fastest growing, one of the fastest developing countries in Africa if Biya had said that in 2016, without a doubt. Southern Cameroons has one of the most celebrated bunch of human resources ever put together on that continent. I don't say it because I'm a Southern Cameroonian. By the way, let me divert here for 1 minute. This term Anglophone is a linguistic definition. It's not an identity of a people. It's just a linguistic thing, right? Togolese are Francophones, Beninois are Francophones, but Togolese are not Beninois. Same, Nigerians are Anglophones. So we are we are Southern Cameroonians, irrespective of what other nomenclature people want to use. But I would tell you that I have spoken to Southern Cameroonians and non-Southern Cameroonians who have had the opportunity to work with Southern Cameroonians, from international organizations, from the World Bank, from diplomats, from engineers. And whenever somebody finds out that I am from Southern Cameroons and they have had the opportunity in academia to have known or met or interacted with or worked with a Southern Cameroonian, they are always so impressed. We have minds. I mean, real academic minds, people who have put in the time and work. It's not all this frivolous, Dr. This from unaccredited, or when you ask somebody, where did you get your PhD, is between me and my family kind of nonsense. I mean, real academic minds. I am so proud and blessed to be a Southern Cameroonian and be surrounded by such depth of intellectual mastery that I have no doubt in my mind that in as much as we may disagree, we can agree to disagree without being disagreeable, but use our... Look, Southern Cameroons was the first country in Africa, I believe, I may be wrong, maybe Dr. Munzu could correct me, to have self-governed when we left the Eastern House of Nigeria in 1954. Those were grade 2 teachers back then. We created our own parliament. We had our own government. We had a peaceful, free, and fair election, a peaceful, free, and fair transition of power. We had institutions that scared the heck out of the French colonial master. This without the commitment of the British, as the French had done. Remember that the British had ruled us under Nigeria because they couldn't care less. They couldn't be bothered about sending another administrator to help us and guide us, though that was the mandate of the United Nations to prepare us for self-determination or independence. We had institutions that very few African countries, between 1954, when we left Enugu, and 1961, when the plebiscite came. How many years is that? Less than 10 years. But look at the number of institutions, economic power basis that La République ruined, that we had. The power comes. Yes, the CDC was given to us, but we were able to manage it properly. We could be given industries, but if we could not manage it, they would have come to ruins, just like BRD.
Mr. Mutia, when I ask you the question, yes, I had against this backdrop, look at what is happening on the ground today. Ayabacho is at daggers drawn with Sisiko, Sako, and this faction. If I ask you, who is the leader of this revolution, what's your answer?
The leader of this revolution, I'll tell you,
and
without...
how can you talk about prosperity when you have no leadership?
We have leadership. I will not bat an eye. Sisiko Julius Ayuk Tabe. You see, Dr. Gabila just said it, and maybe he didn't want to call names, but I would put a whole lot of these, for lack of a better term, clowns in the diaspora who claim to be leaders. The diaspora plays a supporting role, a supporting cast. And like Dr. G said, if people do not have the humility to accept that they are a supporting cast, our leader, the leader of this revolution, is Sisiko Julius Ayuk Tabe, who is in Kondengi, bar none. If somebody can prove to me why Mandela was in prison and not the leader of the struggle, why Aung San Suu Kyi spent 15 of 21 years under house arrest and is not the leader of the Myanmar struggle, why Alex Navalny, who almost died and went back to Russia and is in prison, as Putin, who is the leader of the Russian resistance, he will tell you a guy he put in jail. So unless somebody can convince me that these people, late Dr. Amos of Liberia, who went to jail and came out and was the president, and many others, if somebody cannot tell me why Sisiko Ayuk Tabe does not remain the leader of this revolution, he remains the leader until proven otherwise.
Your point taken, sir. Let me ask Dr. Emma Osung a question at this point. Dr. Osung, you are in an organization that's trying to bring groups, belligerent groups together. If things were that sweet, there wouldn't be need for that. And so are you surprised about the optimism of Mr. Mutia that, oh yeah, if Biya said goodbye, things will be a cakewalk, it'd be Jeffersonian democracy in Southern Cameroon?
I think optimism springs internal, and hope is always a great thing to have. So I respect Mr. Mutia's position.
Disagree with him.
I think I respect it, but I want to add that if history is a guide, then South Sudan is a case in point, right? But before people jump to the conclusion that an independent Southern Cameroon, free from the clutches of La République, will sink into total chaos, is projecting at best, and also allowing history to serve as a guide. But when I talk to my friends in South Sudan, they are making great strides, and they would not change a darn thing for the troubles they have gone through in their own quest to sit down for dialogue with the North. Yes, it was like herding cats, right? Where they went into their comprehensive peace agreement, and the majority of the armed groups did sign it, but at least 3 very deadly groups held out. Now, that did not stop them. That did not stop the international community from pressing for more aggregative, lock rolling, one comprehensive peace agreement, a revitalized peace agreement, and a next peace agreement, whatever they called it, they pressed on. So yes, I sit with some individuals that some might not like the way they operate, but I know exactly why I do that. Because women and children are dying, farms go unattended, and the victimization continues. As I said earlier, if you're not a stakeholder in this war, then you don't understand implications of war. Look at Russia, who knew the price of wheat could be something that would set communities into farming. But that war is happening more than 10,000 miles away, isn't it? So we can't say that we're not thing. It is happening in your backyards, for God's sakes. And if I must sit with some characters that are less than savory, so be it, for the singular agenda of advancing the peace, not that of the graveyard, so that my own relatives in the village, who are my neighbors in the Mbengwi Road, can one day go back and rebuild their burned homes. If I sit in the company of groups that are looking to form a coalition or build a platform where they promote the agenda to address the root causes without precondition, it is one path to solving the problem, and we must all take part in it. But before I cede my time, because I know you're about to cut me off, I have a rather sympathetic view about some of the litany of sorrows around our problems. Here is why. I'm sympathetic because if you've lived to be 60 years, you are set in your ways. And how are we set in our ways? We have been brainwashed. We have lived in a society that believes in divide and rule. That's all we know. We have been brought and fed at the breast of our mothers to understand differences without distinctions. So today, finding ourselves in the clutches of war, we are simply behaving in the way we have been socialized. So I have some sympathies for ourselves, and I call on all of us involved in war, minus the fog of war, to first take a reflective stand and be sympathetic, knowing that we are acting out of impulse. But here is one thing we need to also point out, that there is a policy among Southern Cameroon Ambazonians for something called the policy of negation. We are also a people who are very much for subversion for the sake of it. We are a people who pits intellectual high-mindedness against intellectual laziness. We seem to be in a fight to see which will prevail. Finally, last but not least, we are a people who tend to pray all of our problems into submission and oblivion, and we are aided and abetted in this process. And for that, if we only recognize that and be sympathetic that we have been seasoned for 60 years to be that, and that it takes a lot to unlearn all of this, then when we engage the lack of leadership, we do it a little bit more strategically. Of course, if there was a unicorn of a leadership, do you think Biya would not be gunning down to take it out? Now, when we talk about our demigods, and I like to use that word, let's not forget something, that there will be leaders today, there will be others tomorrow, and the diaspora is not just a basket case. There is a multiplicity of voices, and it must be respected, but we must press the agenda for positive peace.
Scripture says, Dr. Emma Osung, and soon I'll bring on the platform Dr. Munzu, that a house divided in itself cannot stand. You are in a group that's trying to bring people together. What is the obstacle? Why is it taking? Why is it so difficult? Because your group is not the first one. We've heard people go, oh, let's come together, let's do this, let's do this. It's not working. Why do you think you will succeed?
Thank you for that question. The group that I caucus with is called the Ambazonia Coalition Team. And for the record, I do that as an independent. I'm not a member of any of the groups out here except the one that I advocate for women and children, called Women for Permanent Peace. So to your question, it is difficult to, I think it's Dr. Gabila who raised the point very succinctly. It is a difficult undertaking to get people to come together and think about one overarching thing. There is a sense of mistrust amongst the groups that I've seen. There is the experience of personal vendettas and scores that are being looked to be settled. But ultimately, back to my point, it is our penchant for simply engaging in a policy of, if I don't like it, I'm going to take my policies out with me and do something else. Now, to the point of how I guess here is a good place to talk about how to get people together, right? So Ambazonia Coalition Team, or ACT, really came into being because there was an opportunity for a country to step in and take up the possible solution of third-party mediation. Now, we can go into all the details about why some people don't like this, but what did we see come out of that? Instead of all the armed groups coming together who believe they are pro-independentist and push forward the agenda to bring La République to the table, we see that they have their own subversive action and policies of negation that claim all types of things, which I won't take up time. You can go look online for that.
Okay.
But then you see other platforms like the CDN that comes up. I know I've said that word, which I could make some case for it, which I simply say that the 3 C's plus the structure is the problem. So very quickly, instead of coalescing and giving the international community a coherent view, a consistent position, what did we do? We create parallel platforms. That's why I say the 3 C's, the character, the composition, and the content of all these other platforms are in themselves part of the entire landscape of tribal wars being in full force and the ghost of division coming in between. So I argue, I'm all for multiplicity of voices, but we must rise up to one central, critical, key issue that we can all rally behind. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Everybody says the same thing, salvo Ukraine. But instead, in our case, we make sure we again allow that gene in our body of division to come out. So I would say that instead of going out there to create a CDN when an ACT existed, it would have made sense to come together and reprocess or reprogram ACT to suit the same purpose for which you want it to be. In other words, come in and fix it. And that's the character. In terms of the composition, what do we have? We have the entire landscape of Cameroon in one bucket, hence the amorphous nature of the CDN. Now, when we talk about content, we have people within the same platform who will tell you there's no genocide in Cameroon. There can only be 2 things. It's either correct or it's not. And we know it is correct. So you see this continuous robbing of ideas that sometimes are differences without distinctions and sometimes are clear division. So you're either a pro-independentist, you want La République to sit on the table without preconditions, address the root causes, or you are a federalist or a BIA apologist for one and indivisible, and you want a country that continues with solutions from the aggressor. So
I got 2 questions. I got 2 questions for you, Dr. Emma Osung. In this whole struggle framework, is there room for disagreement? Have you heard words like blacklegs, traitors, sellouts? Would you call people who don't share views about it, who don't share the aspirations of independentists, who are federalists, would you call them traitors or blacklegs?
War is a dangerous game. It is not for the lighthearted. The space and place I walk is one to be walked on with some degree of humility. When we get around and use words in times of war, like La République calls us dogs, cockroaches, les Biafran, these are fighting words. They can and do often result in death. So we call for tolerance. I do. Personally, I believe in discussing the issues and let the ideas battle it out, and the truth is often furnished, as Thomas Hobbes would say. So for those who use hate language, for those who use fighting words, they might have a reason that they are at risk. But for us who are not, as I say, in the theater of war, we must press our agenda, press it unapologetically, but be respectful. Again, people want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be valued and included. So yes, the space for discussion is big enough, but the truths are not bendable to someone's caprices. That is why for those who believe that 60 years hence, we can't allow the aggressor to be prescribing solutions. We can allow those who have been co-opted and used as instrument, called the elites of Yaoundé, to now come back to do a redo on us. No, the next generation, hopefully our children, are being more respectful while also defending their position. And this is the cry for everybody. But if in sanctioning free speech, we're also going to have people bend their heads in submission, as I said earlier, praying their woes into oblivion because someone says, keep your head down and keep it low, I would say, speak up forcefully, and be unabashedly clear about why you are in the space while respecting others. Where you can't respect them, respectfully step aside. But for our part, I think too much human suffering is on the way, and it's time we all come together, if nothing else, to get the voice of the victim to be heard. And I can tell you here that the voice of the victim by default identifies what the problem is and what the possible solutions are, because you can't allow what happens in Ukraine be of international consequence and what is happening on the ground in southern Cameroon and Amazonia be a blip on the radar to be forgotten, because that will determine that these people can no longer take that kind of human suffering, and something else has to be done.
Thank you so much for articulating so well. I mean, when I listen to you, something tells me that you believe in the argument, the force of argument, not the other way around. I have that feeling I could be wrong.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me ask Dr. Munzu some questions at this point. Dr. Munzu, you have been described as, you federalists have been described as BS apologists. Now, you talk and you make no qualms about it. You believe that federalism is the way out. You're talking to yourself, BS not even interested. And if you're talking about federalism as the key or the solution, what are you talking about? Is it a 2-state federation or a 10-state federation? Because even there, people are not, among you guys, you're not agreed on anything.
Yes. Okay. I mean, well, I laugh, of course, when, not in mocking, but in dismay, when people say that federalists apologies for the Biya regime. You know, the main theme of this program, and we see it going, your audience is reading it there,
right,
is, you know, any path possible out of the armed conflict in southern Cameroons. Now that's a fundamental question. Can we get the conflict in the southern Cameroons to end? Now, for us federalists, the conflict in southern Cameroons cannot end if we all just continue to say that there was no union, or that the union ought to be dissolved, and that the time has come. It won't happen like that. On the other hand, we federalists remind the Biya regime that although we came together in 1961 to form one country, we did it on the understanding that we were going to be 2 separate states, because there was a need to respect the identity of each of the 2 territories coming into the union. And that arrangement was breached. So don't expect Southern Cameroonians to be okay in this union when you breach that fundamental. So we need to go back to it. Okay? And that forces us, federalists, I will make no apologies about it, that forces us to listen to everybody else's argument. Because we know that the unionists, if that's what they want to be called, those who are for the decentralized unitary state, we know they have their own arguments for wanting that to be like that. We know that separatists have their own arguments for wanting the restoration of what they call the independence of Southern Cameroons. And we are, by choice, in the middle. Because we believe fundamentally that the ultimate answer that gets us that armed conflict in Southern Cameroon to end does not lie in the stream of perpetuating assimilation under a unitary state. We are not so naive as to think that it is an easy position. No, it's not an easy position, because precisely we are, as it were, at our starting point. Both of these parties are likely to see us as the enemy, characterize federalists as, you know, the apologists for the Biya regime. You know full well, Mr. Chamukong, that the federalist regime characterizes us federalists as simply being a secessionists or separatists in disguise. You know that, you know. So, and we are aware of that. It's not an easy position, but it's a position of moral integrity, because it recognizes that there is truth on both sides, there is falsehood on both sides, and that the solution that we have to find is in the middle. Now, so on the basis of that, we're not counting on Mr. Biya. You see, Mr. Biya is not listening to us. He is listening to us like everybody else. How are they listening to us? We are putting out arguments in favor of federalism. We have an audience like everybody else. Okay, when it comes to that, it's a good question, because it is a question on the table. But it is not one which you can push me as Simon Munzu to answer at this stage. You know why? Because we believe that the form of the federation has to address two issues that we consider to be pertinent and relevant in our country today. Issue number one is we have to deal with the question of the assimilation of Anglophone Southern Cameroons. As I say, I always say, whatever you want to call us. We know who we're talking about. So we have to put an end to the assimilation of Southern Cameroons. Some will say the annexation, etc. We have to put an end to that. And in order to put an end to that, we must, in the new federation, have a mechanism where the two heritages, the ones that Southern Cameroons brought into the Union and the ones that the Republic of Cameroon brought into the Union, have to be respected as they were between 1961 and 1972. That points you, excuse me, that will point you to brother. The contemporary reality indicates also that our brothers and sisters in the far north would not be happy with you today if you go and tell them, listen, we are going to restore Cameroon to a two-state federation where you in the far north once again depend on Yaoundé in your own part of the Francophone part of the federation. They will tell you, we don't want to depend on Yaoundé. In other words, we attach importance to our regional autonomy. So we must have a formula that must address those two concerns.
Your point taken, sir. Quick question before I bring in
you won't not before you bring somebody else in, because quite frankly,
okay.
No, sorry.
Okay.
You know, I just want to say that this conversation will probably have gone even better on one side. If Mr. Biya's people were represented on the platform on the other side, and then we federalists in the middle. Because you see, the tendency with the pro-independence is that when they are talking without a willingness to make concessions to the Biya side, they speak as if they are addressing a campaign rally, okay, where you speak only to your own partisans. Similarly, when you listen to the Biya side, when they talk against pro-independence, they too speak as if they're in a campaign rally where they're addressing those their own partisans, and they're not prepared to make any concession for anything on the other side. But we federalists say that we are listening to both. We acknowledge that both have points to make, and that we have to learn to bring their two extremes towards a point of convergence. And that point of convergence will be a return to federation.
Quick question, and I'd like you to answer briefly. You were once Deputy Secretary General at the United Nations. Am I correct?
Well, not Deputy Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General.
Okay, excuse me, sir. Thank you for the correction. Assistant Secretary General. You know the workings of the United Nations. You were there for, I think, 25 years, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Yes.
How do you think your federation is going to come about? You're going to go back to the United Nations or take the case to legal...
Number one.
And I'm going to ask the same question to Dr. Emma also.
Yes, but you know,
yeah.
Before you take me to the international community and the United Nations and all of that, let me be very clear. The Federalist platform is resting on our fundamental belief in the capacity of the Cameroonian people to bring about change when they are prepared for it and well-groomed for it. So our fundamental objective through our messaging, our advocacy, our communication is to awaken the people of Cameroon, not outsiders, the people of Cameroon, and primarily, to begin with, Southern Cameroonians, to the virtues of federalism. And we are persuaded that when that would have been done by the force of argument, those who will carry the mantle of reestablishment of federalism will be the Cameroonians themselves, Anglophones and Francophones. That's why we rely on first. Number two, but we also recognize that while we're doing it, there is reasonable ground to anticipate international support. Once we have demonstrated the seriousness of our purpose ourselves, there will be international support. And you know why? Because the international community would agree with us that when we formed the Union in 1961, we did not do it blindly. That we came into that union on the understanding clearly that would be a federation. And the international community was a witness of that. The international community is witness to the fact that that basis has been eroded. And the international community would be inclined to persuade the other side that, yes, you must go back to honoring the arrangement that induced people to join you. That we believe the international community can do. That is different from saying that the international community will support our claim to so-called restore the independence of Southern Cameroon, because for the international community, Southern Cameroons became independent in 1961, and there is no question of it going back to anything else.
Okay, your point taken, sir. Thank you. I am going to ask Mr. Ato Mochia. Everybody knows you are Ambazonia, and if I understand you, you believe in the battlefield. Well, you were attacked, you defend yourself and fight it there. Dr. Munzo's submission is that this is not winnable. Why do you disagree with him? Or why is he wrong and why are you right? It looks like you have to unmute yourself, sir. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Yes. I'm not going to categorize Dr. Munzo as wrong. He has a right to his opinion, which I respect. I'm a liberal Democrat, so I respect his opinion. But for arguments, I think Dr. Munzo's argument is flawed. I would remind Dr. Munzo that on the 1st of May, 1707, the Scottish Act of Union went into effect with England. On the 18th of September 2014, 307 years after they joined a union, they exercised the right to revisit if they wanted to stay in that union or not. I'm not talking about 1961, which was 61 years ago from 2022. I'm talking about 307 years later. The United Kingdom did not try to stop the people of Scotland from revisiting. Dr. Munzu talks as if 1961 was carved in stone and only God can undo it. When Dr. Munzu understands that a people whom he says the international community recognized as a separate entity from La République du Cameroun can exercise whatever determination they want for themselves 307 years later as the Scottish people without a single life being lost. He says he is hoping to awaken La République. When he can awaken them in 307 years, Dr. Munzu, remind them that just as the Scottish people, we, the people of Southern Cameroon, reserve the right to revisit that union at any given time at our say-so. So it is academically disingenuous to tell the people of Southern Cameroons that because they voted in, first of all, you say that La République has violated, has eroded the basis for that union. I do not know any court in which you go with a breach contract. You breach a contract and you expect a breach contract to be enforceable. It does not exist. It does not happen. Once La République, like you correctly said, Dr. Munzu, violated the terms, the people of Southern Cameroons reserve the right to say, okay, just as Gambia did. Gambia left Senegambia without anybody spilling blood. What on earth is it about La République? What is the attraction that we have to subject ourselves or subordinate ourselves to other countries where the freedom, like in Gambia, as in Scotland, 3 centuries later, exercise that right?
Your point taken, sir. Yes, your point taken, sir. I would like Dr. Munzo to respond to you, and then we'll bring on Dr. Emma Olsen and Dr. Gabriela Fortune.
Thank you. I'd like indeed to respond to that. And by the way, I always enjoy exchanging with my brother Alto, because precisely for what he said, he is a liberal Democrat, and we both are apostles of the force of argument and very civilized and courteous argument. I saw that when he hosted me at the Southern Cameroon's International Town Hall some months ago. So once again, I appreciate you, Mr. Mucha. But let me just very quickly respond to what you're saying, because this is the spirit of civilized exchange. You say what you say, the other person tries to counter, etc. We come to something. Now you take the Scottish example. For a start, it is not in 2014 that the Scottish claimed their right to self-determination for the first time. You know that. You know, right from the moment of the union with England, there were Scottish people, Scottish movements, Scottish associations, Scottish, what we have said, terrorist groups, which over those years contested the very idea of the two kingdoms coming together. You know, so what I'm saying is that there always would be people who, in this kind of situation, disagree with one choice that was made, and they continue to oppose it over time. And Southern Cameroonians are not witnessing in 2016 the opposition to Union with La République. You know that. There are people who voted against uniting with La République. There are people who, from 1961, expressed their discontent with being with La République. And so it did not begin in 2016. So the mere existence of such people in our society does to separate. You know, number two. Secondly, let's not compare the incomparable. The sovereign state called Scotland united with another sovereign state called England, and they did it on the basis of a treaty of union, which, as you say, has stood the test of time for 307 years. The determining characteristic of the Southern Cameroon situation is the fact that however much we may want to pretend, our entire our country, the entire arrangement for coming into union with La Republique, the terms on which that union was concluded, and so on and so forth, have their foundation not in our specific ethnic nationalistic identity, but in arrangements arrived at within the framework of international relations by the international community. Okay? And those arrangements for the international community ended in the agreement that the two territories form a union that was to be a federation. Now, and from that moment on, everything is internal. There may be people inside the country in that internal setting who disagree with the turn of events, and they can resort to all sorts of ways to, in their own view, correct things, including resort to armed conflict. That's possible. So we're not, in its own, condemning that if they choose that to be their cause. But what we're saying is that that option is on the table alongside with several others. And ultimately, the people of Southern Cameroon must be given a chance to decide which of those options they want to go by, including answering the question whether, for them, independence by war, with the cost that comes with it, is preferable to a federation by negotiation, which they may ultimately get. These are feasible options, both of which should go to our people eventually.
Thank you, Dr. Munzo. Before I bring on Dr. Emma Osung, Dr. Gabila, you listened to Mr. Ato Muchia and Dr. Munzo. Do you have something for or against any of the positions?
Well, I think that the positions have been well articulated. First of all, the whole argument that Mr. Ato Muchia makes about the fact that notwithstanding the views of Dr. Munzo, issues are not cast on stone, and making reference to the UK and the Scottish example, essentially says that within the context of international relations and diplomacy, things can be created. Okay, I'm thinking that South Sudan and Sudan was a situation or a context in international relations that ultimately resulted in the creation of a new state. On the specific question, I would default to the views of Dr. Munzo on the issue, because having worked with the UN systems, if he says that there are certain issues that have been documents or agreements that have been sealed and closed and are not subject to be reopened, then I don't have a basis to contest against that. Does that meet the expectations and the aspirations of the people of Southern Cameroon? It doesn't. Are there people who would want us to revisit that conversation? Absolutely. So for me, it then becomes a question of then what is feasible and what is desirable. When you listen to the eloquence of Dr. Emma on the issue, the whole articulation revisiting the historical realities, the fact-based issues that explain how we ended up where we are at, and the sentiments that accompany this whole sense of assimilation, subjugation, second-class citizenship, not being validated, not being listened to, not being accommodated within a specific current body politics in Cameroon, and the whole history of the evolution of violation of the terms of the engagement, the formation of the formation of a federation on certain conditions that were not respected. Now, it essentially brings us to one conclusion from my perspective. We have come to terms with a better understanding of our history, where we are coming from, how we have ended up ourselves as a minority, even if you just agree with the fact that we are a minority within a majoritarian democratic context, and how, from that perspective, our aspirations are not being captured in the existent models of governance. My question, or the question which we then, I think, fundamentally disagree on, is what do we do about it? How do we move forward from here? And in this regard, I tend to be more sympathetic with the view of Dr. Munzo that says that if Dr. Emerson, I wish I could limit myself to being a couch warrior and just sit and listen to people like you talk with the eloquence they demonstrate. But you see, so experiments in the social science that have to do with human behavior are unlike hardcore science in aerospace engineering, where you are dealing with absolutes. So the minute you're talking about dealing with an open society of people of such divergent views within the Southern Cameroonian population, who themselves are not unanimous about what they want. In fact, as I'm talking to you at the moment, vast majority of our brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, uncles and aunties are barons within the same system and regime that they're fighting. The same people whom share the history that you talk about, the same people that we talk about having come from the same experience, from the same past. Now, I am one of those who have come to terms with the realization that you cannot effectively advocate or fight, notwithstanding the merits, the well-founded merits of the arguments that you put forward. You cannot effectively fight.
I have a question for you. I saw her raise her eyebrows
you see,
when you made the statement.
You wonder whether they identify with the same history.
So once you finish, please finish quickly. Let her.
Yes. So let me
get a question to you.
So this is where my view is going to be more aligned with Dr. Monzo's view, because here's the thing: we have to sit down and revisit the terms of our engagement, and let's say the party that is asking for a specific outcome disagrees with the party, with La République du Cameroun, and it has to boil down to a referendum where you have to consult the people to say what is it that you exactly want at the end of the day. There is no guarantees looking at, notwithstanding all the surveys that have been quoted and have been cited, there is no guarantees of any specific outcomes. Now, these are hypothetical. Now, for you to be able to succeed, first of all, to bring La République du Cameroun to the table, you need to be a party of commensurate strength, or at least have caused sufficient disorder and chaos to the extent that within the assessment of La République's own perception of what's happening on the ground, they are better placed negotiating with you than seeking to crush you. And for that to happen, I would not consider, notwithstanding the emotional frustrations and articulations of this generation that has come to terms with the fact that they no longer want things to happen that way, it takes much more than being dissatisfied with the situation to get the kind of transformation that you're asking for.
Now, your point taken. Dr. Omar, Dr. Osung, you have a question for Dr. Gabila?
I actually had a question for Dr. Monzo, but Dr. Gabila makes my point to some extent, and leaves me a bit flat-footed when I hear him say he tends to take the position that Dr. Monzo had offered. So in that regard, yes, to the extent that you make my point about 60 years of indoctrination that leaves us stuck with the enemy and advocating our own brothers that carries out Biya's policy. On that, you have no, those arguments of the past does not change the current situation. Dr. Monzo, I would say to you today on this conversation that the ground under your feet has shifted since you first proffered your well-articulated federalist stance. And what does that mean? We are not where we were in 1984. We are here with a generation that no longer sees itself fettered to a regime that sees it less than human. By this, I mean the abuses, the human rights abuses, and the war crimes that have been committed. For that, Dr. Monzo, and singularly that, the ground under your feet, my feet, our collective feet have changed. Now, I turn it back to you to ask again, how has the Federalists defended the Federation? The answer is not yet. They were able to not defend it, and as such, were annexed and assimilated. Fast forward, you would argue that whether it's Kosovo, you wouldn't say they did not today, that they don't have a right to exist. You won't say that Brexit does not have a right because something, as my good friend Ato said, was cast in stone. So for these absolutes, for me, perhaps not schooled in international law, I don't believe they stand if we look at the geopolitical realities. Yes, as Thibault Nash would say, they do trump our geopolitical legalities, but they do not wipe them completely so as to make your argument hold. That for some reason, as academic as we can carry these exercises, we cannot push for that which has occurred elsewhere. I submit to you that when we came into this conversation, we wanted to look at the reasons why the international community has not found a solution. It's precisely because the tribal wars of Europe sucks up all the oxygen, and the innumerable crises in Africa do not get treated the same way. More importantly, we have not given the international community reason enough through our own hyper-fragmentation. So to your point, atrocity crimes have been committed. The Federalists have failed under your watch, and by that I mean all of those who espouse to the Federalist platform. And to suggest that we come into this conversation somewhat naive as to what the outcome is, that is why we push for third-party mediation, negotiation. And by definition, those words suggest a give and take at the table. And if you agree with me in issues of conflict resolution, you don't come to the table as deuxième class. You don't come to the table with less than a quarter of what you want. No, you bring the full force of your argument and your demand and lay it squarely on the table. That is why I said at the top of this conversation with you, Dr. Munzo, that the poison pill for La République is discussing without precondition the root causes. He, Mr. Biya, and his regime, and the Federalist apologists are unwilling to swallow that pill because they know why. They have very little to hang on to it.
Okay.
When the
okay, Dr. Emma Osum, this is beautiful debate. Believe me, I wish we could be here till tomorrow morning. Yeah. Because I can see people, human beings, disagreeing without throwing jabs at each other, throwing insults. It is the strength of argument. I'm just enjoying it. Yeah. Dr. Munzo, that was rather very prosecutorial. How do you respond to that in 2 minutes? And then, because we have to wrap up at some point.
It was prosecutorial indeed, but I love it. But you know, even in prosecution, you know, there are cases that the prosecution loses and the defense wins, and there are cases in which the defense loses and the prosecution.
And you're still in this argument.
Exactly. So when Dr. Osum says so brazenly, federalism has failed at the time when within this new context, the federalist agenda is being developed and pushed. Already to talk about it already as having failed, it's a bit, I would say it's rather rash. But for the secondly, I mean, to hear you speak, Dr. Osum, you seem to suggest that it is separatists or pro-independence or restorationists who are concerned about the humanitarian consequences of this war. We are all concerned with it. And that is the reason why I, for instance, right from the beginning, I did not wait 3 years, 4 years to see the number of casualties grow. That's why right from the beginning, March of 2017, I started calling for a dialogue on the Anglophone problem to be preceded by a conference amongst Anglophones, because see how disparate we are in our points of view. But if we had sat and listened to each other, listened to all the other arguments, each other's arguments, maybe we would have been in a better position to present to the world what the Anglophone position is. Now, finally, let me say this. You keep coming to this generation. For heaven's sake, in every country, every generation feels that they are the savior of the nation, and they will always they will always blame those who have come before. I mean, in 1993, 1994, when we convened and held the the first and second All-Anglophone conferences, we didn't do it on the basis that the Pa Fonchas and the Pa Munas had a perfect story. No, and we cataloged things that they didn't do right. But we were at least polite enough to acknowledge that they laid a foundation, they did certain things well, they didn't do everything well, and we pointed out to them the things that they did wrong, to the point where they also had the humility to stand up in Buea and apologize to the people of Southern Cameroon for what had happened. And when we came to New York, it was a delegation of old Pa Muna, old Pa Foncha, with quote unquote the young generation that we were in our own time. Okay, so Cameroon is not seeing a new generation for the first time. There are so many mistakes that this generation, if they seriously mean to liberate Southern Cameroons, they are making so many fundamental mistakes due to their unwillingness to listen, to take advice, and so on. So anger is not enough.
Okay, your point taken, because we have to, we have to close at some point. I have a last question for Dr. Osong. I'll bring you back for your closing remarks to Dr. Monzo, Dr. Gabila, and Mr. Mutia. Dr. Emma Osong, when you talk about negotiations, and I do understand the strategy, when I listen to you, taking the very high bar sounded to me like a strategy. But what are Ambazonians willing to give up? What concessions are there? You don't go in and say my way or the highway, do you? If Paul Biya called Ambazonians today, let's talk. What are you advising them to be willing to concede?
Who's the musician that sang the song that you got to know when to show up, when to hold up, and when to fold up? Kenny Rogers? I think that's the spirit you come into in negotiations. You hold what is dear to you close, but you state what unequivocally you need to achieve. At some point, there are concessions. The question is Biya coming to the table? He's essentially afraid to do so. So whether we say here a starting point position is independence, the importance is that the parties today who carry guns should be on the table talking about cessation of hostilities and the substantive matter of who we are in the construct of Cameroon, which at this point we claim and have reclaimed independence. So when we speak about negotiation, it's a rather very vast area to cover here. The important thing for us to keep in mind is Biya is seen currently as not willing to sit down and dialogue to end wars. We've seen it over and over and over. In the case of US, running out of Afghanistan, whether it's Iraq. In other cases, we've seen countries push the leadership of belligerent nations to sit down. I think this, as you said in your advertisement of this show, there is indeed a reluctance by the international community for negotiation. Our remarks on that. But negotiation has been, all wars end in negotiations. The question is, would the regime in Yaoundé succumb and realize that it cannot win when a determined people have made up their minds? This is not because Emma is saying so. There's plenty, historically speaking, to make that point. And Mr. Biya knows that. I think at this point, he just wants to exit this world and leave the problems for another generation. And on the question of generations, yes, Dr. Munzo, each generation indicts the previous. However, here's what I've been on record saying, that we should not bequeath the next generation with a legacy of war. And this generation that is taking up arms, it's incumbent on those who have that resource, that store of knowledge and history, not to bifurcate, not to split the difference, and to look the enemy in the eye and say, we won't allow you to be judge, jury, and executioner. We must take a different path, because the path that has been walked so far has been not only flawed, but led us into war.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Emma Osung. We will get Dr. Gabila now. I'm going to ask him the same question I asked Dr. Emma Osung. Please respond briefly, because we have to wrap up at some point, and we are almost doing that now. What would you, if you were to advise those fighting in the bushes or get them ready for negotiations? Because like Dr. Emma Osung says, at some point, even if we fought for 50 years, all wars end in some kind of negotiations. What would you think Ambazonians should be ready to make as concessions? Confederation?
Well, I will not be in a position to specifically advise what they should be prepared to give up as concession. I would, however, speaking to a general Southern Cameroonian population, to say we should go to the table with the desire to get the best form of autonomy and self-governance that we can get out of an arrangement. So essentially that would be tantamount to substituting independence for a confederation. Substituting independence to say, let's get as much self-governance as possible. Let's get an elected parliament that elects its own governors, that elects a prime minister, as was formerly in the Southern Cameroons, that also finds a way of getting an understanding of how it involves with the central government in terms of the Cameroonian centralized federated government in Cameroon. I would say we should go in there with the desire to secure the rights to pursuing our own development, the desire to secure our access to the international community, international capital markets, the desire to have absolute control over our educational system and our legal system, the desire to have absolute control over our security cluster, you know, to do away with gendarmes and people that harass our people left, right, and center, and to be able to go out there and make sure that we take personal responsibilities for the bread and butter issues that concern our people. If the substitute of that is outright absolute independence, which obviously would be a superior outcome, then so be it. But in the absence of that, in the absence of that being able to be the outcome of a negotiation, I would say we push for as much autonomy as can be necessary to create us the room to pursue autonomous development as a people of the Southern Cameroons.
Thank you, sir. And now I ask the question to Mr. Muchia. All wars end on some dialogue table, and you go to dialogue. It's not a question of my way or the highway. Is it with the Ambazonian group, my way or the highway? If no, what are they willing to give up? That'll be our last word, sir.
If I hired a negotiator to go to the table and they asked me what was I willing to give up even before the other party came to the table, I would fire them. You don't begin to think of what you will give up when you have not even sat at the table. Mandela said, from day one, you put your foot down and you demand what you want and what is our right. If we are doing all this exercise, thinking about what we want to give up and go for federation, for God's sake, I would ask to be buried upside down or face down because of the lives that have been lost for nothing. We did not start this war. Paul Biya declared a war on us. Even in the height of COVID, when the United Nations called for a ceasefire, Paul Biya refused the ceasefire. Even when the Pope called for a ceasefire, Paul Biya refused a ceasefire. We continue to see the indiscriminate killing of our people. And Paul Biya is now seeking military support from Russia when the US pulled out their military support to Biya. And you're asking me what I am willing to give up. When you go into a negotiation, you actually try to get more than you think you deserve, which is what Paul Biya is thinking by us answering the question what we are willing to give up. I don't only want independence. I want reparations for the 500 villages he has destroyed. I want compensation for all the families whose loved ones have been killed, especially innocent civilians. I want reparations for all our institutions that were destroyed, in addition to the independence. I want a demilitarized zone, at least 10 to 15 kilometers between the two countries' borders. I'm not thinking about what I'm giving up. I am thinking about how much more I can get at that table. Because we did not declare war. We are defending ourselves, legitimately so.
Okay, so your point has been taken. Thank you so much. Dr. Munzu, you've heard everyone else, and it's not about what you give up, but what you get more. You've been you've been, like I say, for 25 years in the United Nations, senior levels, involved yourself in negotiations and so on. What is the attitude to negotiations? Both sides, by the way, should adapt if it should go anywhere.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would have been surprised if my brother Atto didn't speak like that, especially in the open. You don't come to the open as a potential negotiator. You don't come to the open and start telling people what concessions you are prepared to make. Nevertheless, if you are serious about ending a conflict by negotiation, then you must integrate in your mind the necessity at some point of making concessions. You don't have to announce that in advance, but you tell yourselves, you know in your mind that I am going into this negotiation. In the nature of things, I'm not going to get everything that I want, so I must make concessions. I'm sure that when the time comes, Atto will see exactly where, in order for negotiations to go forward and be successful, he would have to make concessions. But for now, yeah, it's okay to posture like that. That's fine. But on a serious note, that would have meant, and in relation to federalists, that would have meant, in fact, that those who are gunning for independence would have said to themselves, without declaring it in the open, we know that federation, confederation, whatever, could be a fallback position for us. And that would determine their attitude vis-a-vis those who are pushing for federation.
You have to be wrapping up because we're going to end at
exactly.
this point.
So that's what I'm doing, and so that's it. Now, with respect to the attitude of the international community, we have to understand that the international community is not going to reinvent itself for Southern Cameroons. The international community has its way of doing things. We may like it or not like it. Most of the time, we may not like it, but that does not change it. So it is us, Southern Cameroonians, who are asking for a negotiated settlement to adapt our expectations and our demands to the working of the international community, because it is not the international community that is going to adapt itself to us. That's
Thank you.
Certain. And finally, on the point about the reason why Biya is not sitting down, those who have responded to his declaration of war by fighting him in the war have given him an undeserved justification vis-a-vis the international community, where he can say, I am not, forget about those who are talking about wanting autonomy and so on and so forth. I am fighting a war to maintain the territorial integrity of my country. And the separatists, independentists, call it what you will, are threatening exactly that. When that is over, we will sit down and talk. And the international community would listen to that. Because even the resolution for the declaration of self-determination, as you know, Divine, specifically states that self-determination does not warrant, disturbing, interfering with the territorial integrity of a country. So if Biya sees it from that perspective, you can see that he prefers to play up on that sentiment to get the support of the international community. Anyway, we'll leave it there. But
we'll leave it here because we could keep going till tomorrow morning.
Otherwise, thank you very much for this initiative. And in any case, even bilaterally, including with my sister, Dr. Olson, whom I want to compliment on her book. I don't know if she mentioned it before I came.
I'll be doing an interview with her about the book.
Very
so that's
good.
coming sometime.
On her book, Unraveled, which I'm reading with very keen interest. So even bilaterally on off, we should engage in discussions, because we need to educate each other and ultimately educate ourselves on these issues to be even more useful to our people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munzu. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason I brought all these shades of opinion was because I did not want this show to sound like deliberations at the CPDM Central Committee or Russian Parliament or Chinese Parliament. That's why I thought I should bring these very learned minds for the insightful discussions we have had this evening. Thank you so much. My name is Divine Chamokong. It looks like we'll be coming back again for part 2 of this discussion. That's where we wrap it up for today. Thank you for watching, and be worthy ambassadors of Voices of Africa at Chat Night Africa. Thank you. Goodbye for now.
Filled with the sound of laughter, waiting for Mandela, waiting for Mandela.
My people, today I am free. I am free because you never forgot me. The day is coming when we will all be free. Free from hatred, free from fear, free from killing. You are young. You will live to see the day. And if I don't live to see the day, you better believe it. I'll be there. This is my home, and I'm home to stay.